When I was younger, I thought life was long and that I should devote all of my time to my family. I thought that once they were no longer in need of me, I would finally be able to enjoy the good life, but now I realize that's not the case. I turned 68 this year after 40 years of marriage, and over the years, my life has also become quieter and simpler. I no longer care whether my jewelry sparkles or the cut of my clothes, and I hardly ever consider how to make my days feel more fulfilling. This house is immaculate, with every detail and piece of furniture painstakingly maintained by my own hands, but all I feel standing here is emptiness. The soft amber light from the ceiling shines over the carefully arranged details, casting a warmth that feels oddly hollow. This year's birthday feels different because my daughter Lauren has gained a sizable following on social media recently. She has been making videos titled The Ideal Family Life, in which she always plays the I role of the devoted, considerate daughter and captures touching moments of familial love for the camera. She informed me that her viewers particularly enjoy content about the loving daughter taking care of her elderly mother, so this time she chose to film a birthday celebration and make it the focal point of her channel when I woke up. The clatter of pots and pans in the kitchen on a Saturday morning was unusual in and of itself. Harold usually leaves for his morning run at this time, so the house is usually quiet, which made my temples ache. When I came out of the bedroom, I discovered my 7-year-old grandson Noah on the couch, his eyes fixed on his tablet, while cartoon noises blared from the speakers. He didn't even notice me enter the room, but he was drawn to the scent of spices. I was able to smile and ask Lauren if we were expecting guests today without looking up, but she kept chopping onions and laughing, saying, "Mom, don't you remember we're celebrating your birthday early?" My followers were busy enjoying their own lives over the weekend, so I'll post the video on Monday, which is the perfect timing. I found Lauren and my son-in-law Daniel running around, totally absorbed in the food prep, with several dishes already spread across the table. For a brief moment, I even felt a little touched because they wanted to celebrate with me. I went over to the dining table and looked at the dishes they had prepared, which included sizzling roast meats, lobsters drenched in heavy spices, beef stewed in a fiery chili, and more. My actual birthday is next Tuesday, so today wasn't it, but I assumed they might have been too busy with work to celebrate later, so an early gathering wasn't the worst thing. Harold's parents made it clear they wanted a boy child from the beginning, so when Lauren was born, they remained courteous, but there was always a sense of calm. I gave birth to Lauren when I was 35, which was considered a late pregnancy even back then. The only thing that seemed remotely light was a shrimp dish covered in a thick layer of garlic butter. I was physically exhausted after giving birth at the time, but no one seemed to care if I was getting enough nutrition, and even the most basic medical care felt like an afterthought. I can still recall eating stale bread and too sweet kin juice during those days, which made me lose my appetite and caused my teeth to weaken. By the time I turned 60, I was forced to wear a full set of I heard that dental implants had improved a few years ago, so I thought about getting some, but the price was prohibitive, nearly $4,000 per tooth. And Harold said, "You really want to shove those metal pieces in your mouth? That's disgusting. Your teeth are messed up because you didn't take care of them. Look at me. I'm 2 years older and I can still eat anything," Lauren said. Back then, I told myself that they had a point. Perhaps it was better to consider the next generation eating softer food wasn't the end of the world, but in recent years, even the dentures have begun to feel like a struggle, requiring me to nibble my way through a simple sandwich bite. "Mom, dentures are so much more convenient at your age. Why waste money? It's better to save it for Noah's college fund." The table was already laden with food, and Harold walked through it just as the clatter from the kitchen subsided. I was taking a cautious bite while looking at the heavy, spice-laden dishes on the table when I suddenly felt a wave of disquietude. Was Lauren simply being careless and forgetting that I couldn't chew half of this food? Or was it worse that no one in this family has ever really cared about what I like to eat, or even what I'm able to eat? With one hand in his jacket pocket and the other clutching his gym water bottle, he carried the salty, sharp scent of post-workout sweat. He had no flowers or gifts, and as I gazed at his figure, a heavy weight sank in my chest. The door was so perfectly timed that it seemed like the entire thing had been practiced. Harold looked at the table and grinned and patted Lauren on the shoulder, saying, "Wow, this is quite the setup. Your mom is really getting the royal treatment today. I don't remember you making this kind of fuss on my birthday," so I forced a faint smile. For a moment I felt stupidly naive, even though I had actually held on to a shred of hope like a child staring up at the sky after the fireworks had faded, still waiting for one more spark. I picked up my tea and took a small sip. The bitterness coated my tongue, sliding slowly down my throat and sinking deep. Lauren had taken the whole family to a posh restaurant downtown on his birthday, reserved a private room, and served an elegant dinner paired with wine and candlelight. However, my birthday had become just another stage scene for her social media feed. Noah was about to reach for a piece of roast meat when Lauren swiftly blocked his hand into my chest. Her voice was firm but low, so there was no time for conversation. "Wait, Noah, I haven't started filming yet. Please wait a minute. When the camera is on, remember to behave and not just dive into your food like you did the last time." She adjusted the camera's angle, fine-tuned it, and then smiled as she raised her glass. I froze, and whatever little spark of warmth I had inside was instantly extinguished by her voice carrying the chill of glass shards. She raised her glass again and drew Noah closer, and the young boy looked impatient, but dutifully recited the lines he'd learned. "It looked perfect, Mom. Digitally filtered. Today is your birthday, and no matter how busy life gets, our family always gets together to celebrate. I was obviously coached on Grandma. Thank you for always looking after me. I love you. Happy birthday. I hope you stay healthy and have a lot of happiness." As I stared at this beautifully staged family scene, I was suddenly struck by how ridiculous everything was. Harold seemed moved and even put his hand on my shoulder. His remarks sent a chill down my spine, and my body tensed up as a memory from a few years ago came rushing back. They had said the same thing back then, choosing to celebrate my birthday out of the blue, but the table was piled high with food. "Sylvia, in all these 40 years, have I ever allowed you to suffer? Look at us, our daughter, our grandson. They love you so much. We're a lucky family, aren't we? Lauren puts a lot of effort into cooking for you. That's her way of showing love. How could you be so ungrateful, Mom? I work all week, so I don't have time to remember your food preferences, even when Daniel chimed in. Lauren really tried, so why are you always so difficult to please? I couldn't even chew. I had casually mentioned that the dishes were too tough, and what I got in return was a round of reprimands to discuss their efforts, sacrifices, and exhaustion, but whoever remembered me? I knew Harold couldn't handle acidic food. Even a small amount of vinegar would cause him to get mouth ulcers. I also knew Lauren had a peach allergy, so I always peeled her fruit thoroughly. I also knew Noah detested chicken skin, so I would carefully remove it from the drumsticks whenever I made soup. Finally, I remembered Daniel's aversion to cilantro, so I would completely omit it when I cooked. I put down my teacup, my hand still holding the chopsticks, paused, then dropped them heavily onto the table. I looked Harold in the eye, my voice calm but firm, and something inside of me snapped. Not from hurt, but from clarity. A sharp, blinding clarity that was cold and lucid. I don't want to continue playing this charade of a happy family any longer. The air around the dining table turned to stone, and even the background noise from Noah's cartoon felt strange and out of place. Daniel was the first to react, running over and hitting his paw on the camera, freezing everyone's smiles on the screen. Lauren frowned, obviously annoyed, as if I had just ruined her meticulously planned plot. Harold blinked, then slipped, laced with a sharp edge. "So Harold, where's the orange cake I asked you to pick up?" Returning to his typical dismissive tone, he said, "Oh, the cake. I went to pick it up this morning, but I ran into Ruby on the way. She said she'd been craving it, so I gave it to her." He waved it off as if I were being unreasonable, saying, "I'll go get you another one tomorrow if it means that much to you." His tone was light-hearted, as if he were dismissing a minor grievance, but it felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. Although I knew my teeth couldn't handle much and I didn't have any cravings, I had been thinking about that orange zest cake for a long time. Harold had casually and easily promised to bring it home, but even that small wish of mine was denied. I stared at him and asked him, word for word, "It's my birthday today. Shouldn't there be a cake?" couldn't compete with a casual remark from Ruby Lauren, who jumped in to try to defuse the situation. "We can't have a birthday without a cake. It will look better on camera, too. The audience loves that kind of thing. I'll order one right now." She took out her phone and feigned to open the delivery app. I just stared at her, a chilly laugh growing silently in my chest. She didn't care if I wanted the cake. She was more concerned with how it would look. His face darkened instantly, and the entire table tensed. "Lauren, don't order anything," he said, his voice simmering with anger. "Don't spoil her, she's 68. Does she really need to act like some idiot?" I turned back to Harold on camera, my voice low and razor sharp. "If Ruby wanted cake, couldn't she buy her own? Is she broke, or has she gotten so pathetic that she's begging for handouts on the street?" He dropped his chopsticks and looked at me with a look of contempt. "Ruby's husband passed away. Her children are gone, and she's been going through a difficult time. What's the harm in giving her a piece of cake?" "Sylvia, you're being ridiculous. Can't you hear how nasty you sound?" I looked at him. His tone and expression were so familiar and condescending, and there was no sign of regret. Lauren's face changed. All she had wanted was a heartwarming, sentimental video. But Harold's outburst made her look like an uncaring daughter. She spoke up, her voice laced with frustration. "Mom, I took time off to come home and cook with you. If you didn't like the food, you could have. Isn't this tap full of food enough for you? Lauren and Daniel tried to come home and cook for you, and now you're acting like a fool." I looked at her, and whatever warmth I still had inside turned to ice. I had always known deep down that they didn't really care, but in this moment it finally settled in clear, cold, undeniable that in this house, my feelings, needs, and wishes have never mattered to them. A birthday cake was just a prop. Nice, if it's there. Just said so, but ruining everyone's mood like this. Harold's promise was as light as the air it floated on, spoken and dismissed as easily as Lauren's so-called devotion only existed when the camera was rolling. Their version of love only applied when I played the part they had written for me. If it's not, it's irrelevant. But to me, it was a tiny bit of tenderness that I had dared to ask for after decades of being ignored. I got up, pushing my chair, back gently but firmly, straightening my spine, and was about to leave when Harold suddenly grabbed my wrist. His voice turned sharp, asking, "Where do you think you're going just because I said a few things?" "You're walking away, Sylvia. Have you completely lost your mind?" His grip was stronger than I had anticipated, and I suddenly remembered the man he used to be back when he ran. I yanked my arm free and stared him down, my voice as cold and cutting as a blade. "Today isn't even my birthday, so if you want to film something or celebrate someone else's special day, go ahead." Then I turned to Lauren, my tone steady but edged with quiet fury. "Do you even know what I like to eat? You've never." Even though Lauren's face froze and her lips slightly parted, she remained silent and assumed that I would comply, as I usually did. I was the easy mother, the one who never caused a stir and played along to maintain harmony. But this time I was done playing their patience. As soon as I stopped playing along with their meticulously planned performance, the masks on their faces were completely shattered, and Lauren was the first to erupt. Her voice was sharp and reprimanding, as if she were reprimanding a disobedient child. "Please stop being so unreasonable. The shoot is important to me, and my subscribers have been waiting for this video. Why are you making a scene now?" Daniel chimed in quickly. "Yes, Lauren has been planning this project for weeks, Sylvia. Why can't you just go along with it? It's only a few minutes," and now Harold's expression darkened before I could reply, and he pointed at me with a voice full of annoyance. "Why can't you be more like Ruby? She's so considerate and never fusses. Unlike you, who is only growing more difficult with age." Harold slammed his hand on the table, his voice rising in anger. "Could you please take a moment to consider Lauren? She works nonstop and still made time to come. Do you even realize how cruel you sounded just now, Mom? Aunt Ruby has always been kind to us, and you sit here insulting her, and you're just mean." Lauren had completely dropped the sweet daughter act by that point. Her face twisted in frustration, and her voice stabbed at me like needles. "Home and cook for you instead of being grateful you nitpick everything you can't help? Fine, but do you have to stir up drama in your own house?" She stopped and looked at me from head to toe before her lips formed a mocking smirk. "You knew I would be filming today, and you couldn't even bother to dress nicely because people would think we're ignoring you the way you look right now." I stared at her motionless, feeling nothing but a spooky stillness like a lake that has died in the winter, but she wasn't finished. "You're always making fun of Aunt Ruby and pouting, perhaps. Things would be different if you spent more time learning how to be a graceful woman and less time sneering." Noah, now cowering nervously in the couch's corner, said, "I don't like Grandma anymore." "Grandma Ruby never yells like Sylvia Grandma." I froze. That scene took me back decades to when Lauren was a young child and Ruby had returned to our lives one afternoon. Lauren had previously refused to let me visit, do her hair running. Instead of pouting and clinging to Ruby's leg, "Mommy, I despise you, Mommy." "I want Aunt Ruby to be my mother because she's sweet and attractive and far superior to you." I dismissed it as a child's careless comment at the time, but now, years later, she's still by Ruby's side, even after my grandson was turned into Ruby. She has always lurked around the murky corners of my marriage and never needed to fight for. She just quietly buried herself, tearing down everything I had worked so hard to build. She never spoke, but she was able to gain Harold's generosity, Lauren's love, and everyone else's sympathy. In some ways, I was portrayed as tough and cold, but now I see it clearly, perhaps for the first time, that the issue wasn't me, but rather that they never really saw me, as family photos flashed through my mind in a cruel montage Harold's birthday, sipping fine wine at the most expensive restaurant in town, cutting into prime steak and lobster, and my birthday, a staged meal, in the kitchen that was dressed up to look warm but empty at the core, Lauren's wedding. I meticulously planned everything by hand and worked myself to the bone to make sure it was flawless, but in her speech, Ruby was the person she thanked the most when I suggested purchasing a. I looked down at my wrinkled hands, and strangely, I felt calmer and lighter than I had in years. They called the practical fabric couch for the house a waste of money, but Harold didn't hesitate for a second when he gave Ruby an entire dining set. All these memories pierced me like shards of glass piecing together a bitter truth. I was never more than a background prop in their lives, expected to serve and to be silent, never to be cherished. I raised my head and allowed my eyes to slowly move over each familiar yet unfamiliar face until I finally settled on Harold. His features were still sharp, but his expression was devoid of warmth, just a hollow, exhausting kind of indifference. Harold was once the man I loved with all of my heart, but now he was nothing more than a stranger who sapped my last remaining energy. I took a deep breath, my voice steady, crisp, and resolute. "Harold, I want a divorce." The afternoon sun shone through the floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room, scattering shadows on the floor. The room was eerily silent, with the only sound being the regular ticking of the old wall clock. The air felt heavy and tense, like the silence before a storm. I stood in the center of the living room facing Harold. Lauren was seated across from me, and although her face conveyed a mixture of scrutiny, confusion, and belief, I didn't flinch, Harold, for once. I said calmly, "I want a divorce." As soon as I said those words, I felt a strange sense of release, an unfamiliar lightness, as if I had finally let go of the 40-year chain I had been carrying behind me. There was a slight pang of sadness, but Harold's face froze. Lauren's eyes widened as if I had just told a cruel joke, and seconds later, their shock turned to mockery, the curve of their mouths slicing across my face like knives. Harold scoffed, his voice unmistakably full of disdain. It wasn't regret for the marriage. Rather, it was a quiet farewell to the silent sacrifices I had made all those years. Sylvia, you're not 18 anymore. I already teased this episode. So what do you want me to do now? I looked at the faint smirks tugging at the corners of their mouths, and Lauren finally snapped out of it. Her brow furrowed, her tone sharp and impatient. Mom, what the hell are you doing divorcing at your age? How am I supposed to explain this to my followers? This time, I wasn't backing down. I took a deep breath and turned toward the bedroom the closet buried in a dusty corner. I felt like I was shattered inside, and they didn't think I would actually leave. They thought this was just another outburst, like all the others over the years, where I would complain, argue, and then go back to being the obedient wife, agreeable mother, and backdrop they could rely on. One afternoon, while cleaning the study Harold had been out, I came across an old folder I hadn't touched in years. I thought it was just old bills or tax documents, but when I opened it, I discovered it was a cookbook. A thick, handwritten collection of dessert recipes carefully arranged with careful notes. Ruby prefers creme caramel, so keep the sugar level moderate. Harold had taken those baking classes all those years ago, and he had become obsessed with pastry techniques. Not for me, not for this family, but for Ruby, who loved tiramisu cut the coffee in half. Ruby prefers light cheesecake, which has a smoother texture than traditional New York style. Harold's face changed the moment Lauren looked at the book in shock. It was obviously the first time she had ever seen it. Harold asked me what I liked to eat, and he never once went into the kitchen to make a single dessert just for me. I returned to the living room and put the recipe book on the coffee table, my eyes cold and steady. "You thought you hid it well," I said quietly. But the truth always finds its way out, mouth as though to explain. But I didn't care anymore, so I turned around and went back to the bedroom. I opened a suitcase and started packing, carefully folding and placing my clothes one by one. I wasn't just packing things. I was packing 4 decades of disappointment and exhaustion. Every book, photo, and keepsake that I had once poured love into now felt like a burden pressing against my chest. Wanted them, I didn't need them anymore, so I zipped the suitcase closed and got up to take one last look around the house. From newlyweds to parents, from laughter to silence, this house held a lot of memories, but I didn't want to take any of it with me. I grabbed the suitcase and headed for the front door without turning around. I heard Lauren ask, "Mom, are you really leaving?" Harold's voice was followed by a hint of panic. "Sylvia, don't be impulsive. You're too old for this. Where would you even go?" I stopped, turned around, and my eyes pierced them. My voice was clear and calm, and I said, "Where will I go?" I turned the knob and left. I went back to my mother's old house, and as soon as I entered, the smell of old wood welcomed me. It wasn't a large space, but it was quiet. When I returned to my mother's old house, I felt completely exhausted, as if something inside of me had been hollowed out. I could hardly keep my feet up. It felt safer and warmer than the grand house I'd spent 40 years in. There were no opulent furnishings, staged smiles, or people I had to tiptoe around. I used to think that this place would be my peaceful haven in old age, but I never imagined that I'd return because my marriage had fallen apart. Despite my exhaustion, I unpacked my suitcase and spent the entire afternoon cleaning, mopping the floors, scrubbing the windows, and wiping down every nook and cranny until there was no more dust and a subtle warmth returned to the room. Only, at that moment, did I finally collapse onto the bed and go into a deep sleep. When I woke up, sunlight was gently slanting across the room, and the house, which was both familiar and strange, sat in complete silence outside. Shadow danced on the window pane, casting a soft glow onto a worn photo frame on the table. I stared at the faded picture, and as I did so, a wave of emotion quietly swelled in my chest 40 years ago. I vividly recall a warm spring afternoon blind date set up by mutual friends at a charming downtown cafe. Harold was a lively young man full of ambition back then, and our meeting had been touched with romance and promise. He wore a sharp suit, smiled with quiet confidence, and spoke with charm and courtesy as he told me about his career plans and painted vivid pictures of a gorgeous future and pledged to provide his wife with the safest and happiest life possible. And I had completely trusted him. In those early years, we were warm and lived simply, but we cooked together, watched old movies, and took long walks in the park. When Lauren was born, our small family felt even more complete. Harold was a good husband and father in those days. I genuinely believed that he was someone I could build a life with when he returned. Ruby, Harold's first love, the one who slipped away in his youth, returned to our lives with a delicate sadness and a voice laced with love. He took me out for steak on my birthday, stayed up all night at Lauren's bedside when she was ill, and surprised me with a late-night movie when I was exhausted from chores. Harold once said, almost in a whisper, as he sat in the study one night, his eyes filled with a tenderness that had nothing to do with me. At first, he only mentioned her occasionally. She talked about her failed marriage, loneliness, and the regret of a love that never had its fair chance. After that, there were late nights and excuses for working overtime and attending business dinners. One evening on our wedding anniversary, Harold abruptly put down his fork, grabbed his coat, and said, "I need to go help Ruby because her car broke down." I sat there by myself, staring at the flickering candlelight and the cold steak on my plate, and I came to the bitter realization that something had changed in our marriage. From that night on, Harold started to take Ruby's place quietly. Bringing her up more frequently, followed by the covert bank transfers, he began experimenting with desserts. She enjoyed learning recipes, taking baking classes, and becoming certified as a pastry chef, not for me or our house, but for her. After 40 years of marriage, I was unable to even get a birthday cake, so I once asked Harold, "What am I to you?" His response never changed, Sylvia. "Don't be self-centered, Ruby. I've been through a lot, and I'm just trying to make up for it. But what about me? I spent 40 years in every room of this house, from the kitchen to the living room, and my time, patience, and care were all worthless. What really got to me was how Lauren started to like Ruby. She copied her makeup, admired her beauty, and said things like, 'Mom, why can't you be more like Aunt Ruby? She's always elegant and sweet, not constantly nagging like you.' I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the memories, thinking that perhaps leaving them today was my long overdue awakening, but at least I had finally made a decision. That moment robbed me of whatever pride I still had, and it felt like my own daughter had declared me obsolete in my own home, believing that I was not even worth as much as an outsider. At that moment, a knock on the door broke the silence of the room I had just. When the doorbell rang, I had just finished folding the bed linens and was on my way to the kitchen to boil a kettle of water. My heart clenched instantly, and I had a heavy sinking feeling that whoever was on the other side of that door wasn't someone I wanted to see. I sat down, took a deep breath, and walked to the door, just as I had feared. And there was Harold standing on the other side, with Ruby. Harold, clearly wearing his Ruby's ever-perfect expression of delicate sympathy, kept her eyes downcast, playing the innocent victim as if this failed marriage had been my own doing, rather than the result of their joint betrayal. The moment I saw them, my stomach twisted, nausea rose to my throat, and I forced myself to stand tall. Ruby's usual look of smug indifference, as if my dramatic escape was just some childish tantrum to be brushed aside. Harold's words exploded into the room, but the weight they once carried no longer had any hold over me or that old instinct to shrink to obey it. Fingers gripping the doorframe to anchor my composure, Harold spoke first, using that same condescending tone he always used when he thought he was being reasonable. "Okay, that's enough. Come on, pack your things. Let's go home. Lauren's video isn't even finished yet." Was gone. So I leaned against the doorframe and said, "I've already filed for divorce. Ah! His face fell, and Ruby's expression stiffened, the soft curve of her lips faltering just a little. At my age, filing for divorce wasn't a hasty decision. I had talked to an attorney weeks ago, done my research, and knew exactly what I was. Entitled to receiving Social Security benefits and a property pension. Just earlier today, I completed the paperwork online and gave my herald snapped, his brows drawn tight in shock. "You're 68, Sylvia. What do you think you're going to start over with, Ruby?" A lawyer arrived to serve Harold with formal notice, and Sylvia stepped forward, her voice soft and her eyes wide with pretended innocence. "Please don't do something you'll regret, and don't let this be about me." "I never meant to come between you two," I said. Harold's face darkened, his voice dropped low, tight with barely restrained fury, and he said, "Oh, stop the act. Now that I'm out of the picture, you don't have to sneak around anymore. You can finally move in together and eat his desserts in peace. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Not to mention that the house you're standing in right now is still marital property, so if you want a divorce, we'll have to sit." I calmly explained that my lawyers had already prepared a draft and that we would divide everything equally and legally. He was so accustomed to controlling every shot that he was momentarily stunned by the thought of me expressing my will, and he laughed bitterly. "You're really going to go through with this?" I looked him in the eye. I've never been more certain. In my eyes. He was silent for a while, and the anger in his face gradually changed to a fake gentleness and calculated softness that he probably thought would win me back. His voice was lowered, and I stared at him. This man I once loved was now standing on my doorstep like a stranger with a familiar face, stirring nothing in me other than silence. "Resolve?" "No," I said in a calm and final tone. "My lawyer will get in touch," and then I closed the door. The gentle click of the lock sounded like a full stop at the end of a lengthy sentence, but the air inside the house felt cleaner and was no longer tainted by Ruby's overpowering perfume or Harold's sharp cologne. The silence returned, this time with a welcome kind of peace rather than a heavy void. It was almost over, so I leaned against the door and closed my eyes to breathe in the silence. I should have taken this step long ago, but I had done so now, and that was enough. I knew that this was just the beginning, that a life was waiting to be rebuilt, a rhythm to rediscover, and that I would need to work for a living or find something of my own. Perhaps it was time to check if the local community center was hiring for any craft jobs, because programs Grace instantly reminded me of a kind woman who had once taken care of my mother in her last days. She was quiet and careful and enjoyed crocheting and quilting. We spoke a few times, and she had mentioned volunteering at a craft co-op downtown, even implying that someone with my abilities could easily find work there. Perhaps it was time to give her a call. The first thing I did after completing the divorce was set up. I told myself that this is where my life truly begins again, after selling my mother's old house, which had once been the place I imagined growing old in, but had already served its purpose. I had a full medical checkup, and when I held that health report in my hands, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. The tension that had been holding my chest for so long finally eased, and my body was mine again. And my health and future were finally back in my own hands. Proceeds, I bought a small 2-bedroom condo in the nearby town's Fountain Hill Estates neighborhood. It wasn't a big apartment, but it was bright and sunny with views of tall trees and fountains. For the first time in decades, life felt structured and peaceful. After I moved in, I started meticulously creating my new routine, one detail at a time. I went to the local hiring center to make sure eventually I met a young woman named Lila, and I liked her right away. She was witty, cheerful, and efficient, and she always knew what to say without being intrusive. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She felt more like a considerate friend who happened to help when I needed it. Finally, I got back to something I had loved greatly as a child: crocheting and quilting. I joined the community center's craft classes to help me get back into the rhythm, but after the first class, people started swarming around me to ask if I'd be willing to teach. Their excitement caught me off guard, and it was there that I was, reunited with Grace, who volunteered at the community center as a coordinator for the arts and crafts programs. We hadn't seen each other in years, but she was just as elegant, and she said she had never forgotten how my hands brought warmth to every piece of fabric, and I was calm, as I recalled being warm, steady, and quietly competent. We caught up and talked about the good old days. She patted my hand gently, saying, "Maybe it's time you found a new path for yourself, not just for others." With her encouragement, I started regularly teaching crochet and quilting. I started selling my handmade scarves, pillows, and woven wall hangings at the local market after taking classes at the community center. I thought it would be a small hobby, but the response was so overwhelming that people were drawn to the warmth of the handmade items and their quiet story. Grace became my true partner because she had a knack for business and logistics. We registered a small creative studio called Knots and Threads, a boutique brand focused on fiber arts and hands-on beauty. We started a weekly online series called Craft Circle, where we filmed tutorials, shared tips, and discussed life growth and healing. Gradually, our audience grew into a consistent and devoted group. She also helped design our logo, set up an online shop, and suggested that we share our work on social media. This wasn't some grand empire that didn't need to be. It was something that fed my spirit and made me feel useful and fulfilled again. This life, to be honest, felt richer and more liberating than anything I'd known before. Mostly women my age sent messages expressing that they recognized themselves in our stories and that our hands-on creativity had rekindled something they thought they'd lost. Later, after saving enough, I finally treated myself to a complete set of dental implants that day. I went straight to the small diner on the corner after leaving the clinic and ordered a warm walnut brownie and a platter of fried chicken. Every bite was rich, crispy, and incredibly satisfying. It wasn't just my teeth that felt stronger. I felt like I had regained control of my life, and my days started to settle into a new, steady rhythm. In just a few years, my life had changed in ways I never could have predicted. Our handmade creations gained a devoted following through our brand Knots and Threads. Initially, we sold small quantities of scarves and quilts at weekend markets, but soon we accepted custom orders, attended artisan fairs, and even got invited to regional craft expos. What began as teaching crochet and quilting classes at the community center evolved into a full-fledged venture. Every week we filmed a brief tutorial video sharing techniques, fabric tips, bits of our everyday lives, and my journey of starting a business at the age of 68. The audience's reaction surprised me. Women my age wrote to say our stories rekindled their passion for life, while younger viewers referred to our slow-paced crafting aesthetic. Grace handled brand management and promotional outreach, while I concentrated on content creation and teaching. Even my housekeeper, Layla, became one of our biggest fans after joining our small team and taking charge of social media content and video production. One day, she made a suggestion that would change everything. You should try live streaming and conversing with your audience in real time, I bet. It's calming and genuine, a rare kind of comfort in their fast-paced world. People watched me stitch and chat, asking questions, sharing their stories, and listening as I explained the significance of each fabric pattern in the life that inspired it. At first, I was afraid I was too old and awkward in front of the camera, but with Grace and Lila's gentle encouragement, I gave it a try. To my surprise, the response was overwhelming. Became well known in our town as a Silver Age entrepreneurial brand. We even received a community education grant to start a new program called Crafting a New Chapter, which is a series of workshops aimed at teaching retired women how to make crafts and explore second career options. Women like me, who had previously felt invisible, started to rediscover their purpose, confidence, and creativity and I was able to have something completely unique. Life's work that belonged to no one else. Not a husband, a family name, or a role I was expected to play. With her boundless energy, Leela worked by my side, and Grace remained my most trusted partner. Together, we created something genuine. Not because we were needed, but because we were genuinely seen. I had assumed that by this point in my life, I had found all the freedom and peace I needed, and I believed that. 3 years after the divorce, on a calm weekend afternoon, I had just finished a live stream and was getting ready to make a pot of black tea when the doorbell rang. I thought that Lala had forgotten her keys, but when I opened the door, it wasn't her. It was Lauren, who didn't look anything like the voice from my past. However, life seems to always have its own ideas, and the next turn of fate was already quietly waiting. Lauren, the woman I remembered, had her long, flowing hair chopped into a blunt cut. Her face was drawn, her complexion was sallow, and her wide eyes were dull with exhaustion. Her once confident, headstrong presence had completely disappeared. She entered the house and immediately collapsed onto the couch, her voice trembling in horror. Before I could say anything more, Lauren. Her sobs were so raw and jagged was tearing through the room like glass breaking on tile. "Mom, please, 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 please come back. Without you, this family would be nothing. Ruby is a fraud. She is addicted to gambling, and the story about her son studying abroad was a lie. He broke off contact with her years ago and moved across the country." We were completely wrong. Harold had wasted no time inviting Ruby to move into the house after I left, and at first everything seemed to fall into place. Quiet dinners, cozy conversations, the illusion of a long-lost soulmate returning to heal what I had supposedly broken. But it didn't last, Ruby. It turned out to be nothing like the truth. We were selfish, I'm sorry. I just want things to go back just as the three of us started over. As she cried. Harold had convinced himself that she just wanted to enjoy life after years of hardship. But when the bills started to pile up like a flood, Ruby began interfering in Harold's finances and pressuring him to combine their accounts. She had feigned being an elegant gentlewoman, but she was lazy and impulsive, spending lavishly and constantly, making extravagant purchases, and going on extravagant shopping trips, accounts, and even urging him to use his retirement funds to invest in shady ventures that her alleged friends had suggested. She convinced Lauren to sell one of her rental properties, insisting that the family should live comfortably together. However, things took a turn for the worse when Ruby's moods became erratic, abandoning things one night while intoxicated and slurring, then turning to Lauren and sneering, "Your mother never deserved to marry Harold in the first place," and the tension quickly increased until Lauren realized that the mythical son abroad didn't exist. Ruby didn't have a stable background and wasn't financially savvy. Her credit card debt was getting close to its limit, and worse, she had taken out loans in Harold's name. It wasn't until Harold realized the woman he had clung to was the dream and memory. Fantasy was just a well-packaged lie, but it was too late. Harold's financial life was already in ruins. His company's dividend payment had been frozen because of the debt guarantees he had unwittingly co-signed with Ruby. Worse, the bank had sued him for delinquent loans in both of their names. And when it all fell apart, Harold's health suffered a severe heart attack, and he was taken to the hospital. Ruby disappeared, leaving behind a trail of unpaid bills in the ruins. The man who once controlled everything and thought he could control life to his will had finally been forced to face the bitter consequences of his decisions, and his fall was as complete as it was. He was confined to a wheelchair after being released from the hospital and was unable to perform even the most basic tasks without assistance. Unavoidably, I let Lauren in. She sank into the couch, her voice hoarse, and barely held herself together. "Mom, I really can't handle this anymore." I sat quietly and watched her say nothing, rubbing her forehead as though that would help her feel less burdened. "High channel collapsed," she whispered. and people stopped purchasing my content because they thought my life was staged and that everything was carefully planned. The majority of my followers stopped buying from me, and brand deals vanished. I tried to pivot after sponsorships ended, but I have no idea what I'm doing. I keep trying to cling to something, but the more I try, the more I sink. It's like drowning in mud. She paused, threatening to look at Mike, who said that I was unstable and that everything in my life was in disarray. Now that I'm raising Noah, alone, I'm barely holding it together, and there was no anger. Left only a quiet, complicated calm in my eyes as she looked down once more. Dad isn't doing well either. He's essentially bedridden now and refuses treatment most days. He keeps saying that his last wish is to see you again. But I didn't answer, I didn't agree, and I didn't refuse. I just gave her a glass of water and asked her to leave gently. I spent a long time thinking after she finished it that night. Not because I still had feelings for her, nor because I wanted to find closure or reconciliation, but because I knew that if I didn't confront the past head-on, I would never be completely free of it. Eventually, I went to the hospital, and as I stood in the doorway of the hospital room, I saw the man who had once controlled boardrooms, and every area of our lives is now fragile and buried in his bed. His eyes are unfocused, and his voice is a whisper. When his eyes met mine, there was a brief moment of recognition, regret, or perhaps just a vanishing trace of Sylvia. He said, "Thank you for coming," with trembling lips and shallow breathing. I truly apologize and regret everything I said. I just stood there, staring. After staring at him for a while, he asked in a barely audible voice, "If I had brought you that cake that day, would things have turned out differently?" I gently shook my head because he already knew the answer. I turned and left the room without turning around. The sunlight was golden and soft, and the smell of early summer grass permeated the air. For the first time in a long time, I felt light and unburdened, and Harold's ending didn't bring me the rush of retribution, but it wasn't contentment I experienced. It was just clarity. He was merely bearing the consequences of his past decisions, the cost of taking everything for granted, including his health, finances, and so-called companion steep. Ironically, those were the very things he once believed. I lacked, but I now had plenty of them, so I didn't need to boast. Didn't have to fight back. I just left him where he belonged before. Lauren continues to occasionally bring Noah to visit. There are no longer any fervent requests or attempts to make things right. Gone. We live in silence together. She no longer attempts to make amends for the past, and I still teach, craft, and share tales on my channel, so don't expect her to change into someone she isn't. Selling my job and meeting new individuals recently suggested that we go to a handcrafted fair in the north next year. Who says old age is only for sitting on couches and in kitchens? I said yes to the arts festival, and I still want to see more. Go deeper. The past isn't worth it. What needs to be longed for is the future. Despite devotion, I didn't really realize who I was till the latter part of my life.